Good evening and welcome. My name is Jackie Vossler. I am the president of the Caxton Club. It is my great honor to introduce tonight's speaker and our program, which has been co-sponsored with the Union League Club Boys and Girls Clubs of Chicago. This presentation was originally recorded in September as part of the Union League Club's own celebration of the fabulous murals in their Boys and Girls Club space. Tonight's program, focusing on Miklos Gaspar and his mural cycle, is brought to us by none other than John Blue, a longtime member of both the Caxton Club and the Union League Club of Chicago. John was born and raised in Chicago, educated at Dartmouth with a law degree from Harvard University. He has practiced corporate and security law in Chicago for over 45 years. But equally important is that John is a noted scholar on murals of this WPA period. It is my great privilege to introduce fellow Caxtonian John Blue and his presentation.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here. My name, as you know now, is John Blue. I'm a member of the History and Archives Subcommittee of the club's Library Committee, under whose auspices I am speaking tonight. In gathering information for this talk, I have had help from many people, each of whom I have recognized in an appendix to a much more detailed paper I wrote earlier this year on the same subject. But I would be remiss if I did not mention tonight Cheryl Ziegler, club librarian, who quietly assisted and encouraged me numerous times since I began this project almost a year ago. I am grateful to all who lent me a hand. A dozen private dining and meeting rooms occupy the 8th floor of this clubhouse, but one of them, room 816, the so-called Boys Club room, is special. Its walls, all of them, are covered from the chair rail to the ceiling with a mural cycle that was painted in 1935 by the Chicago artist Miklos Gaspar. The murals in 28 scenes depict activities at the 2 neighborhood boys clubs and the summer camp then operated by the Union League Foundation for Boys Clubs, as it was named at the time, a sister organization of the Union League Club. While this talk primarily focuses on these murals and the artist who painted them, I first want to briefly put them in their historical context. Also, I hasten to point out that in 2020, the foundation celebrated its 100th anniversary. When the murals were painted in 1935, the foundation had been in existence for just 15 years. Accordingly, this talk concludes with a summary of some of the many changes that have occurred in the foundation's operations in the 86 years since 1935, and also an explanation of why, nonetheless, I believe this mural cycle remains not only a valuable and important work of art in the club's collection, but also a relevant teaching tool for the foundation. Except for those few of the artist and his wife, all of the black and white photographs that illustrate this talk came from the archives of the foundation or various issues of the monthly club magazine. All of the color photographs of the murals that are shown were taken earlier this year by a professional photographer engaged by me. A set of those color photos and all rights with respect to them, as well as a copy of my previously mentioned paper, have been conveyed to the club and deposited in its archives. Finally, a word on nomenclature. When I sometimes refer to the club, I mean the Union League Club of Chicago. When I refer to the foundation, I mean the Union League Foundation for Boys Clubs, an Illinois not-for-profit corporation whose name was changed in 1988 for obvious reasons to the Union League Boys and Girls Clubs. And when I sometimes refer to the boys' clubs in the camp, I mean Clubs 1 and 2 in Chicago and the Wisconsin Summer Camp operated by the foundation as they existed in 1935. The historical context. In 1920, over half of Chicago's population consisted either of immigrants or their children. Most of them lived in densely populated neighborhoods in the inner city, where manufacturing and other unskilled jobs were nearby and plentiful. Housing conditions were deplorable. On Chicago's long and narrow lots, tenements were built 2 and sometimes 3 deep from street to alley, each typically housing multiple families and leaving children no place to play, except in those very streets and alleys. Many of those children dropped out of school by the 4th or 5th grade. These conditions led to high rates of juvenile delinquency and adolescent crime in the inner city wards. It was in this context that a small group of pioneering members of the Union League Club, following much discussion, study, and planning, came together in December 1919 to organize the foundation. Its purpose, as stated in its Articles of Incorporation, was, and I quote, to found and maintain boys' clubs for the promotion of the social, moral, and physical education and development of underprivileged boys in Chicago, close quote. Its charter also provided that the foundation was to be overseen by a board of trustees, all of whose members were also members of the Union League Club. What the foundation achieved during its first decade, aided by the extensive involvement and generous financial support of many members of the Union League Club, is truly extraordinary. To wit, the establishment and operation of 2 fully staffed boys' clubs, the first of which, known as Club 1, was opened in 1920 in a renovated 1880s building in the Pilsen neighborhood of the Lower West Side community, and the second of which, known as Club 2, was opened in 1927 in a new purpose-built structure in the East Village neighborhood of the Westtown community, 2 miles north of Club 1, and the opening in 1925 of a fully staffed summer camp on an 80-acre parcel of rolling open land, including 2/3 of a 17-acre lake near Salem, Wisconsin, 60 miles north of the 2 boys' clubs. The demographics of the Pilsen and East Village neighborhoods in the 1920s were similar, densely populated with working-class Eastern and Southern European immigrants and first-generation Americans, and a large population of what the foundation considered underprivileged boys who would benefit from the services and activities offered by the 2 clubs and the camp. In seeking to raise money for the Club 2 project, one of the foundation trustees stressed that it was important to, quote, explain something about the underprivileged boy as a factor in our nation so that the businessman won't get the idea that it is a philanthropic or sentimental institution, but a business proposition, close quote. Among the Union League Club's over 2,000 members at the time were many of Chicago's most successful business and professional leaders, many of them so-called self-made men, among whom such a message was likely to resonate. And just for the record, less than 2 years after the opening of Club 2, in those heady days of the late Roaring '20s, the foundation trustees in February 1929 resolved to build a 3rd boys' club. 3 months later, the foundation purchased and cleared a site for this proposed new club in the Little Italy neighborhood on the west side of the city. Elaborate plans for the new building were prepared by Mundy and Jensen, the same architects who 2 years earlier had designed not only the Club 2 building, but also the clubhouse in which we are meeting tonight. Those plans were to be presented for approval at a special meeting of the foundation trustees to be held in November 1929. But of course, it was not to be. Black Tuesday, the stock market crash, occurred on October 29 in that year, and soon thereafter the Great Depression ensued and lasted throughout most of the 1930s. The plans for the third club were abruptly abandoned and the site later sold. This slide of the west side locates clubs 1 and 2 and proposed club 3. So this is an experiment for me, but that would be club 1 in Pilsen, club 2 in the lower part of Ukrainian Village or East Village, and this is where club 3 would have been, and that's where we are tonight. So, and just to give you an idea, so Western Avenue runs right along there. So it's the near west side, really. Okay. The financial depression and economic hardship which swiftly followed the stock market crash were hard on the population served by the foundation and on the members of the Union League Club. The foundation's financial condition steadily deteriorated due to the decline in contributions from members of the club. Just as funding was declining, the demand for services provided by clubs 1 and 2 was, according to the foundation's managing director, quote, greater than ever before in the history of the clubs, close quote. Salaries of foundation staff were reduced and some positions were eliminated. Operation of the camp was suspended for the summer of 1932, and a portion of its 80 acres was leased to a local farmer as pasture for his cows. It was an incredibly tough time all around, and it was in this context that the murals in room 816 were conceived and painted. The murals. At the annual meeting of the foundation in January 1935, its president reported that the country was in the 5th year of the Depression and that, quote, the boys' clubs are supported entirely by members of the Union League Club, close quote. The foundation was seeking ways to stimulate interest in the work of its boys' clubs among Union League Club members and to increase their financial support of that work. DeWitt Clough, then the president and later chairman of Abbott Laboratories and a member of the Union League Club, is credited with coming up with the idea of dedicating a private dining and meeting room on the 8th floor of the club to the boys' clubs and of picturing their activities on the walls of that room. I'm just going to take a drink here. Excuse me. As Mr. Clough stated in an interview at the time, quote, it occurred to me that it would be a good idea to have a boys' club room. I believe that more Union League Club members could be interested in the boys' club work if it was visualized to them graphically through the use of the headquarters room, portraying the work that was being accomplished. Doubtless, many club members now who are not participating can be persuaded to donate some of their time and money to this excellent cause, close quote. A small working group of foundation trustees was appointed to collaborate with the club's house committee to make it happen. Room 816, at the time one of the smaller rooms on the 8th floor, was selected for the boys' club room, as it was called then, and as a handsome plaque outside the room reads today. The working group decided that the appropriate decoration for the walls of the room should be, as a contemporary article in the monthly magazine of the club stated, quote, an interpretation of the boys' club activities, and that this interpretation should be made from actual scenes from the boys' clubs, close quote. I could find no record of how Mr. Clough came up with this quite remarkable idea to paint an entire room at the club with murals. However, the 1930s were truly the golden age of mural art in the United States. The famous Mexican muralists Diego Rivera and Jose Clemente Orozco, came north early in the decade to paint major mural cycles in this country. The three celebrated American regionalist painters, Thomas Hart Benton, John Stuart Curry, and Grant Wood, were also painting important commissioned murals during the same period. Not to mention the literally thousands of murals painted during the decade by unemployed artists in public buildings across the country as part of the federal arts project of the New Deal's WPA and its predecessor. And it happened that the spectacular Century of Progress exposition took place during the summer months of 1933 and 1934 along the Chicago lakefront. Colorful Art Deco and Art Moderne buildings featuring elaborate decorative arts programs were the rule at the Century of Progress, to which millions of visitors flocked during its 2 seasons. Many of the buildings at the fair featured mural art, including some major cycles among their decoration. Some of these murals were executed or supervised by Miklos Gaspar, who had emerged in the 1920s and early 1930s as Chicago's leading mural painter, most notably a 40-panel cycle in the General Motors Pavilion, the largest of the fair's private exhibition buildings. This slide shows some of those panels. Gaspar was the supervisor of this entire mural project and painted 13 of the 40 panels himself. When the fair was over, these murals were donated to Lane Tech High School on the northwest side of Chicago, which coincided with the opening of that school's new building in 1934. To this day, they line its halls. It seems highly likely that Mr. Clough and the members of the working group viewed some of these murals and were impressed by them. The timing is such that it does not seem too great a leap to speculate that this was the genesis of Mr. Clough's creative idea and what may have brought Gaspar to the attention of members of the working group charged with implementing that idea. In February 1935, the foundation engaged Miklos Gaspar to paint the Boys Club murals for a fee initially of $600. Inflation adjusted to 2021, about $11,500. At 50 years old, self-employed and recently married with a child on the way, Gaspar was probably not only available, but eager to take on such a significant local project in the depths of the Depression when so many artists struggled to find any paying work. Gaspar began painting in room 816 in late February 1935 and completed his work by the end of August in that year, a period of about 6 months, probably with a hiatus of a few weeks in late May and early June, during which the room was enlarged, as described later in this talk. There is no record of how or by whom the content of the individual scenes was determined, but it is clear that the foundation wanted the murals to tell a visual story of the positive impact which the boys' clubs had on the lives of their members and the kinds of activities at the clubs that produced those results. My guess is that the working group took the lead in outlining the content of each of the scenes and then left it to the artist to fill in the details. There is more information available on how the murals were painted. A 2013 condition report by an independent conservation expert engaged by the club states that the artist first glued large sections of linen canvas to the raw plaster walls of the room, overlapping them at the seams. He then applied a coat of white paint as a base to the entire surface of the canvas. Next, he outlined the figures and background of each scene in brown paint. Finally, he filled in the outlined figures and background with different colors and thicknesses of oil paint. He used a light color palette, including a range of blues, greens, pink, orange, black, white, gray, and reddish brown, with some details in metallic gold pigments. Each of the scenes is set off from the others by colorful 4-inch bands of geometric and curvilinear patterns. The room must have presented a stunning sight during the early years following completion of the murals. Did Gaspar paint the scenes from life or use boys as models for the murals, as two sources have stated? There are over 450 individual figures portrayed in the 28 scenes, far more, it seems to me, than Gaspar could have painted from life or from models, except in the broadest sense in which those terms were used. One of those sources is an article in the April 1935 issue of the Club magazine, which includes this photograph of the artist at work on the murals. The caption reads in part, quote, "Mr. Gaspar is shown here at work in the room, sketching from life. Every panel represents a character from the actual environment of the boys' clubs and a close study of the scenes and spirit of the two institutions," close quote. The photo shows two young club members standing on a table in a boxing pose next to the boxing mural scene outlined in the north wall, on the north wall of the room. While charming, it is almost certainly staged for the magazine. The boys in their pose look nothing like the boxers in the finished mural shown here. The record is clear that before beginning to paint the murals, Gaspar visited clubs 1 and 2 in order to observe firsthand the boys and the activities that took place there. Given his history as a war painter on the front lines of World War I, which we will get to, he probably was excellent at sketching quickly and accurately, and it is likely that he made sketches of the boys and their activities while visiting the clubs. He may also have taken photographs during these visits. There is no record of him visiting the Wisconsin camp, and I doubt that he did so, but he would have seen the model of the camp, which went on display in the lobby of the club during the late spring of 1935, when the camp scenes were being painted. I believe that in painting the murals, Gaspar worked from those sketches and any photos he took from the many pre-1935 photographs in the Foundation's archives and from his own imagination. The murals are now 86 years old, and they are showing their age. Until smoking was banned in the club about 14 years ago, cigar and cigarette smoke did much to darken their vibrant original colors. Diners, waitstaff, custodians, and other users of the room have caused numerous nicks and scratches to the lower 2 feet of the murals. And the canvas has been cut in a few places and parts of the murals removed to allow for the installation of ventilation grills, electrical wires, sprinkler system hardware, and light switches. But the most serious culprit, according to the 2013 condition reports of 2 outside conservation experts, is a coat of what appears to be linseed oil varnish, which covers the entire surface of the murals. According to the report of one of these experts, the varnish was probably applied by inside club staff in the 1940s or 1950s in an effort to stabilize and preserve the murals. The varnish over time has turned a light yellow or ochre color, dimming the original colors used by the artist. Worse, according to both experts, this particular type of varnish makes it doubtful that it can be safely removed or even thinned without irrevocably damaging the underlying murals. The good news, according to one of the reports, is that the canvas is largely intact and preserved, and that the white ground layer is, quote, intact throughout most of the surface and appears well adhered to the underlying canvas, close quote. And though neither report says so, the varnish layer, with all of its faults, does seem to still be protecting the underlying paintings from further deterioration. Take a look at my crude diagram of room 816. As originally configured, when the artist began painting the murals, the room was half its current size. It was rectangular in form, with the longer walls running from west to east, the entrance door centered in the short west end of the rectangle, and a window occupying most of its east end. So just very quickly, I think it's clear. So yeah, that's the west side. This is the east. This was the original room, and that wall was intact there. And so I'll just point that out. As a result, room 86, in May 1935, in the midst of painting the murals, the room was considerably enlarged by removing most of what had been its long south wall, marked by a dotted line on the diagram, and combining it with room 814, with significant implications for the murals. As a result, room 816 now consists essentially of two overlapping rectangles, the original one just described running west to east, and the new one with its longer sides running from north to south. Thus, a visitor now enters the room through the door at the northwest end, quickly walks under and past the initial and final murals in the chronological cycle on the walls of the entrance portal, and comes into the larger and longer part of the room with two windows along the east side and a single long dining and conference table occupying much of the space in that north-south rectangle. This configuration adds to the challenge of reading the murals in the chronological order intended by the artist. Using approximate figures, the ceiling of the room is a uniform 10 feet high. The chair rail, painted white, is 3 feet from the floor to its top. The 7 feet from the top of the chair rail to the ceiling are filled with murals on all 93 feet of wall space in the room, 60 feet devoted to scenes from clubs 1 and 2, and 33 feet devoted to scenes from the camp. There are 21 scenes that focus on clubs 1 and 2 and the activities that took place there in 1935, which are color-coded in red on the diagram, and 7 scenes that picture activities at the camp, which are color-coded in green on the diagram. So, well, I think you can kind of make out what I'm talking about. I won't use the pointer. I'll keep going here. So the Club 1 and Club 2 scenes. The 21 Club 1 and Club 2 scenes and the one indoor camp scene are intended to tell a story in chronological order, beginning with the 5 scenes on the far west wall in the entrance portal of the room, then moving to the right to the 10 scenes along the north wall, and then continuing with the 6 scenes originally painted on the removed wall and now remounted on the longer part of the west wall, and ending with the large mural on the south side of the entrance portal. All of these scenes, except the last, are roughly the same size and reflect the same stylistic character. They would have circled the west to east rectangle in the room as originally configured. Let's now look at each of those 22 scenes. So facing the entrance door, the story begins with the 3 scenes above the door. Each of them pictures unkempt boys in tattered clothes idling in the city streets. The group in the scene on the left are on their hands and knees playing what looks like a game of marbles, while an awkward and poorly painted boy stands to the right. The top half of this scene, including the upper half of the standing boy, as well as small portions of the upper part of the adjacent scenes to the left and right, are unvarnished and were undoubtedly painted much later by someone other than Gaspar, probably when this area was uncovered as a result of the removal or rearrangement of mechanicals. The center scene depicts 2 boys being cuffed by a policeman while a third frowning boy looks on. And the scene on the right shows boys encountering an unsavory older man. These are boys engaged in antisocial activities before they join one of the boys' clubs. These 3 murals were described in a 1935 issue of the club magazine as depicting, quote, the raw material, close quote, a manufacturing term which an audience of businessmen might well identify with. I'm just going to take a second to get a drink here. Sorry. Immediately below these 3 scenes are murals of the Club 1 building on the left side of the entrance door and of the Club 2 building on the right side of the door, each with an identifying emblem, including the year in which it began operation. The 2 clubs, in a sense, beckon the boys in the streets above to join them. We move next to the right, to the long north wall of the room, where a total of 10 scenes of approximately equal size have been painted, 5 on top and 5 below. Here is a photo of all 10 scenes. Moving from left to right as we face them, the first, top left, depicts a group of boys relaxing in comfortable furniture in front of the lobby fireplace in Club 2, engaged in conversation. Below, bottom left, is a scene of boys receiving physical and dental exams by a doctor and dentist, a regular part of the program at each club. Moving to the right, the next pair of scenes show, on top, 4 boys at work in the woodworking shop at one of the clubs, one of the crafts then taught and supervised by experienced instructors. Below is a scene of boys playing basketball in the Club 2 gymnasium, a very popular part of the recreational program at both clubs. Again, moving to the right to the next pair of scenes, the upper scene shows a group of boys engaged in setting type and operating a printer in the print shop at one of the clubs. Printing was one of several useful crafts taught to the boys at both clubs. The boys did much of the printing for publications of both the Foundation and the Union League Club. The lower scene shows boys in the swimming pool at one of the clubs. Both clubs had good-sized pools and regular classes teaching the boys how to swim. Moving again to the right, the next pair of scenes show, on top, boys playing various musical instruments in an orchestral or band setting, being led by an adult conductor. The managing director of the foundation, in his annual report for 1935, lists classes at the 2 clubs in 1934 in the following music categories: band, orchestra, jazz orchestra, violin, drum and bugle, and piano. The lower scene, which we have seen before, shows 2 boys boxing at one of the clubs. We next get to the final 2 scenes on the far right of the north wall. The upper scene shows boys relaxing in the game room of one of the clubs, playing chess, checkers, ping pong, and pool. The lower scene depicts older boys meeting with a member of the club's staff. Some of the older boys formed group clubs within the larger membership of each club. In some cases, these groups were more constructive offshoots of street gangs to which the boys belonged before becoming members of Club 1 or 2. If we were to continue proceeding clockwise around the room, we would turn next to the 6 large camp scenes on the east and south walls. But instead, I would like to turn your attention to the 6 indoor scenes on the longer part of the west wall in the larger part of the room. They resemble in size, style, and subject matter the 10 scenes we have just examined on the north wall of the room. I believe these 6 scenes were the next to be painted by Gaspar on what had been the longer portion of the south wall of room 816, as it was then constituted, and which, as previously mentioned, is marked by a dotted line on the diagram of the room, which I show again here. An article on Gaspar's progress that appeared in the April 1935 issue of the club magazine states that, quote, Mr. Gaspar is busy at the present time painting the scenes. The room is to be completed by May 1, close quote. However, as the artist neared completion, The working group realized that the murals on all sides of the small room were somewhat intense and that there were no outdoor scenes of the camp, which was such an integral, popular, and important part of the overall foundation program. The minutes of the May 23, 1935 meeting of the foundation trustees make clear what happened next. Quote, Mr. Conrad reported that Miklos Gaspar's work on the Boys Club room was now almost completed. Suggestions have been made that the room is a little small for the number of paintings on the wall. Mr. Doherty favored making the room larger, as did the artist, Mr. Gaspar. The south wall could be removed, and since the paintings are all on canvas, they could be removed from the wall without damage to the murals. Mr. Gaspar would do the additional murals required on the east and south walls of the enlarged room for an additional $400, close quote. The trustees then authorized removal and storage of the 6 murals then adorning the south wall, the removal of that wall, and the use of the new east and south walls of what had been room 814 for more mural scenes. They also approved the additional $400 fee for the artist to paint those murals. That brought Gaspar's total fee for painting the entire room to $1,000, inflation adjusted to $19,000 in 2021 dollars. Not only did this enable much larger meetings to be held in the room, but it also provided much more wall space on which to depict outdoor scenes of boys at the camp. The trade-off is that it interrupted the flow of the chronological mural cycle, which was present in the smaller room. After the longer west wall of the enlarged room had been prepared, the 6 scenes that had come off the south wall were then remounted in pairs, 3 on top and three below on that west wall, where they remain today. Here is a photo of those 6 scenes in their new location. I would like to examine them now. Starting at the left as we face the west wall, the scene on top is of boys sharing what looks like a bountiful meal in a rustic dining hall, probably at the camp. The scene at the bottom left of 2 boys wrestling under the watchful eye of an instructor as other boys look on is particularly fine, I think. It certainly shows off Gaspar's skill as a painter. Moving to the right to the next pair of scenes in the middle of the wall, the upper scene shows two older boys, one playing the piano and another the violin, while a third figure, possibly a teacher, stands at the piano and a few younger boys watch. The lower scene depicts boys putting on a play on the stage at one of the clubs, while the other boys and parents look on from the audience. Both clubs had popular drama classes and put on several plays each year, performing not only at the boys' clubs, but also on occasion in one of the large rooms in the Union League Club. Turning next to the last pair of scenes on this west wall, on the far right, the upper scene shows boys in the shower room adjacent to the swimming pool in one of the clubs. I have heard that in recent years, some have criticized this scene because the boys' nude backsides are exposed. Let me just say that I have struggled without success to understand such objections. In this scene, note the rectangular section at the bottom left, which is unvarnished. It looks to be a piece inserted into the panel at a later date and painted to match the rest of the scene, and that is just what it is. A file memo written in 2012 by the club's then curator of art records a phone conversation she had with the club's former painting conservator, who carried out some work in the room during the summer of 2001. The memo states that, quote, the conservator confirmed that the rectangular panel in the shower scene on the west wall was an inset fabricated by one of the interns who worked with the conservator that summer. It replaced an inset likely dated to the 1970s, which was found to be in poor condition, close quote. This 1935 photograph of the scene shows what happened. As previously mentioned, this scene was originally mounted on the south wall of the room. When that scene and the others on that wall were taken down to allow the wall to be removed and were then remounted on this west wall, there was the rectangular fresh air vent, which is shown in this photograph, in the space to be occupied by the shower scene, necessitating cutting out a section of the mural to allow the vent to be exposed. In the 1970s, when new air conditioning mechanicals were installed in the entry portal to room 816, the fresh air vent in the mural was no longer needed, so it was removed and a new piece of wall was inserted in its place and painted to match, obviously not by Gaspar, who died in 1946. Even though the painting on the inset is well done, the unvarnished inserted piece sticks out like a sore thumb and distorts the entire scene. I think it would have been better to simply leave the obsolete vent cover in place, especially since the two upper scenes to the left of this scene have similar vent covers still in place, which detract very little from the visual appeal of those scenes. The lower scene portrays boys in an arts and crafts class, watched over by an instructor ready to provide help and guidance. We next turn the corner to look at the large mural scene on the south wall of the entrance portal to the room, where we began. This was intended to be the final crowning scene in the chronological story told by the mural cycle as it was originally executed before the room was enlarged, which I think explains its commanding size. As previously mentioned, in an October 1935 article in the Club magazine, As previously mentioned, an October 1935 article in the Club magazine referred to the unkempt young boys in the street in the three small scenes above the entry door, which begin the cycle as the raw material. That same article refers to the well-dressed young men sitting and standing around the table in the handsome library in what I believe is Club 1 as, quote, the finished product, close quote. These senior club members, having spent years engaging in the activities and receiving the instruction portrayed in the murals we have just examined, are ready to leave the club and take their places as law-abiding, constructive, and contributing members of society. It is also the scene in which Gaspar chose to paint in the lower left-hand side of the border in bold letters and numbers, his name, the year, and the city. The outdoor camp scenes. I now want to turn to the 6 scenes of the Wisconsin camp, which Gaspar painted on the east and south walls of the enlarged room, beginning in late June 1935. These were, I believe, the last of the murals done by the artist. These 2 very dark photos, the first of the 3 murals on the east wall and the second of the 3 scenes on the south wall, will, I hope, at least give you an idea of the size of these murals. Size of these murals. Individual photos of each of these scenes, which follow, are much better, I think. These murals have a completely different look and feel from the 22 previously examined scenes. One obvious difference is that they are huge, each 7 feet tall and averaging 6 feet in width. Their very size adds to their visual impact. The foundation minutes indicate that there was pressure to complete the project and open the room. This significant added wall space required at least 6 more weeks for Gaspar to complete his work on the room. I surmise that reducing the number and increasing the size of the camp scenes enabled the artist to complete each panel in less time. Another similarly obvious difference is that they are all outdoor scenes. Here are better photos of the 3 camp scenes on the east wall and then the 3 scenes on the south wall. You can just feel the clean air, the open spaces, the big sky, and the joy in the faces of the boys as they partake in a range of activities portrayed. One also gets a sense of the rituals at the camp. None of these scenes requires any explanation. They tell a clear and straightforward story, understandable to all who view them, which is one of the hallmarks of mural art. While perhaps a bit idealized and now compromised by their age and ill-advised treatment, they still convey the benefit of bringing inner-city kids out to the country for 2 weeks of supervised rest and recreation. The two scenes on the east wall between the two windows portray, on the left, boys at the daily flag-lowering ceremony, and on the right, boys responding to the bugle call for dinner and being checked for clean hands. The third scene on the east wall on the far right depicts young boys on swings. The three very large scenes on the south wall immediately catch the attention of most visitors to the room. They depict, from left to right, boys engaged in a tug of war, boys playing baseball, and boys at the lake. There are charming touches in these murals. Look, for example, at the little boy with the dog watching the baseball game, and the two boys holding their fishing poles and two tiny fish caught by one of them. We have now examined all 28 of the scenes painted on the walls of the Boys Club room. Please remember, however, that looking at photographs of the murals is a poor substitute for viewing them in person, which any club member or guest of a member may easily do by visiting room 816 any time that it is not in use. And I'm told that the room is open and will be open after I finally finish this, and you're all free to go up and have a look. Dedication of the murals. The newly completed Boys Club room was dedicated at a gala buffet luncheon held in the room on October 10, 1935, 9 months after the project was conceived. It was a major event with many foundation trustees, other prominent club members, and a number of their guests in attendance, including the artist. In what was described in the November 1935 issue of the club magazine as a, quote, short but impressive service, close quote, the president of the foundation tendered the 28 murals which decorate the room to the president of the club, who received them on behalf of the club. Praise for the murals. The murals have been widely praised over the years. Eleanor Jewett, the longtime and admittedly conservative art critic and editor of the Chicago Tribune, attended the 1935 dedication luncheon. In the course of her long review of the murals in the next day's issue of the paper, she stated that, quote, the artist Miklos Gaspar has presented his themes graphically and simply. The murals are superb. They startle you by their visual quality. He has had a marvelous subject and done his best by it. Chicago has cause to rejoice in the Union League Boys Club room and what it signifies, close quote. Many years later, Mary Gray, the distinguished Chicago art historian, in her 2001 Guide to Chicago Murals, described the murals as, quote, charming and often amusing vignettes that fill all four walls of the room, close quote. Describing the significance of the murals in her essay on them in the comprehensive 2003 Union League Club Art Collection catalog, Mary Ann Richter, then the club's curator of art, said that, quote, these lively scenes stand not only as examples of the great interest in mural decoration during the Great Depression, but also as important documentation of the programs offered by the Union League Boys and Girls Clubs during its early years, close quote. There are mural cycles done in the 1930s and still extant in this country that qualify as great works of art and are so regarded by most critics and the institutions which now house them. The murals painted by Miklos Gaspar that I have seen, including scenes from the boys' clubs, are not of the same quality as those just mentioned. But the Boys Club murals are skillfully done and qualify as an outstanding visual document of social history and a rare example of a 1930s mural cycle which remains on the walls of the room in which it was originally painted. An added bonus is that they exist at eye level, allowing them to be seen up close. They deserve to become a regular part of the docent-led tours of the club's outstanding art collection, of which they constitute an important part. About the artist. Miklos Gaspar was born in 1885 in a small town in eastern Hungary, when Hungary was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which at the time stretched across much of Eastern and Southern Europe. He eventually moved to Budapest, where he studied art for 2 years, traveled through Italy as part of his education, and then returned to Budapest, where he established himself as an artist and received various awards for his painting. This undated photo of Gaspar was probably taken during this period. After the outbreak of World War I, in which Hungary fought on the side of Germany and the other so-called Central Powers, Gaspar was pressed into service as a war painter on the Eastern Front, where he sketched and painted scenes on the front lines. Hungary and the other Central Powers suffered a complete military defeat in the war. In the resulting 1920 peace treaty, fully 3/4 of the territory of pre-war Hungary was ceded to surrounding countries. The Hungarian economy was severely depressed, and to make matters worse for Gaspar, who was Jewish, Hungary was one of the epicenters of the anti-Semitic pogroms that spread across Eastern Europe after the war. For Gaspar, then, who was still single, there was little to keep him in Hungary and several reasons for him to join literally over 1 million Hungarians who had emigrated to America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, seeking jobs and a better quality of life. And he did just that, emigrating to this country in March 1921 at the age of 35. I don't know why Gaspar chose to come to Chicago, though there was already a sizable Hungarian immigrant community in the city, and he may have had contacts here. At any rate, he settled in quickly, was able to rent one of the subsidized live-work studios in the Tree Studios complex on the near north side, and began painting and seeking commissions. Within a year, he was awarded first prize in the Chicago Tribune's historical mural painting competition, and this became his specialty. He was also a skilled easel painter, working in oils and watercolor. In the 1920s, he won prizes in the annual Chicago and Vicinity Artists Exhibitions, sponsored by the Art Institute of Chicago. Murals, though, were his bread and butter. He received commissions for them in Chicago and in other Midwestern cities. One of his largest mural cycles was painted in 1929 on the walls of a major public room in the Medina Athletic Club building on North Michigan Avenue in Chicago, which now houses part of the Intercontinental Hotel. In 1931, Gaspar made his only trip to Europe after coming to the United States. I was told that he made that trip to Hungary in search of a bride. He was 45 at the time and still unmarried. About a year later, Clotilde Weiss, age 31, Hungarian, and then living in Budapest, Jewish, and also single, emigrated to the U.S. Shortly after that, in June 1932, Miklos and Tildy, as she was called, were married by Rabbi E.H. Berger in Chicago. Here are photographs of the couple, one taken on their wedding day, and another probably taken a few years thereafter in their home at 829 West Lil Street in the city, to which they moved after their marriage. In May 1935, while Gaspar was painting the Boys Club murals, their only child, Anna Gaspar, was born. Perhaps because the popularity of mural art was waning in the late 1930s, it appears that the Boys Club murals may have been Gaspar's last major commission. He died of a kidney disease in 1946 at the age of 60. For the last 8 years before his death, he painted religious murals in many churches in Chicago and nearby cities. Tildy and Anna, who was only 11 when her father died, continued to live in the Lill Street house while Anna attended high school at Francis Parker and then college at Northwestern University. Here is a photo of Anna, who never married and had no children. Tildy died under tragic circumstances at age 59. Miklos and Tildy are buried side by side in the historic Oakwood Cemetery on Chicago's South Side. Anna died at age 84 in April 2020 in Las Vegas, Nevada, her home for the last 25 years of her life, only a few months before I began work on this project. The Foundation's operations today. The Foundation has undergone profound changes and growth in the 86 years since the Boys Club murals were painted. Some of those changes are obvious when you consider what is missing from the murals. First, there are no girls or young women pictured. As the Foundation's name at the time implied, they were not permitted to become members of Clubs 1 and 2. In fact, it would be the mid-1980s, 50 years later, before they were able to join, and I am told that they have done so in such numbers that today they are approaching parity with their male counterparts. Second, no African American or Latino boys appear in the murals. The Foundation states that it has never discriminated in its membership policy and that it believes that the membership of its clubs should reflect the diversity of the neighborhoods they serve. From the start, the Foundation targeted white ethnic neighborhoods on the west side of the inner city as the sites of Clubs 1 and 2 and proposed Club 3. There is no doubt that the need for the services offered by the Foundation to disadvantaged boys in those neighborhoods was compelling. Those communities were then rigidly segregated racially and remained so for many years. So it is not surprising that the membership of Clubs 1 and 2 in 1935 was overwhelmingly white. It is worth remembering also that the Foundation was organized and Club 1 opened less than a year after the occurrence in July 1919 of the worst and most deadly race riot in Chicago history. Happily, all of that has changed, as the ethnic composition of the residents of the Pilsen neighborhood has changed to predominantly Latino, mostly Mexican American. So has the ethnic composition of the boys and girls and the staff of Club 1. I'm sorry, I'm going to take a drink here. By the way, I'm almost finished. Thank you for your patience. After 100 years of continuous operation, Club 1 remains the flagship of the Foundation and was significantly upgraded by a $5 million renovation project completed in 2012. Here is what it looks like today. Club 2, on the other hand, became the victim of gentrification in its East Village neighborhood beginning in the 1990s. Early in 2008, the Foundation sold the 1927 building, which formerly housed Club 2. It now forms the main part of the campus of Wolcott College Prep, a private high school for students with learning differences. Here is what it looks like today. Its cornerstone, naming the Foundation, is still there. Club 2 now operates as one of the Foundation's non-traditional clubs within Wells Academy High School, where it serves high school students drawn from a much wider geographic area of the city and younger children during the summer months. In the 1970s, the Foundation took over the operation of a small youth club in the Humboldt Park neighborhood on the northwest side, renamed it the Barreto Club, and over time vastly expanded and remodeled its clubhouse into a modern, fully equipped and staffed boys and girls club which now serves a predominantly Puerto Rican American and African American population. And in 2015, the foundation launched a $5 million campaign to serve the predominantly African American neighborhood of Englewood on the south side of the city. To do so, it has partnered with 3 public elementary schools and 1 high school in Englewood to operate fully staffed after-school clubs in those facilities. It also now operates similar non-traditional clubs in schools for predominantly minority children in the Humboldt Park, Westtown, and South Lawndale neighborhoods. The goals of these clubs are to promote and foster academic success, good character, and healthy lifestyles among its members. The foundation even operates a program in the Cook County Juvenile Detention Facility on the west side to help reduce the high rate of recidivism among young people who are temporarily housed in that facility. Oh yes, and the camp at Salem, Wisconsin is still going strong. It now comprises nearly 250 acres, including full ownership of the entire 17-acre lake on the property, and operates programming 12 months a year. In a word, it's a remarkable success story by any measure. Summing up, so where does that leave the Boys Club murals? Are they embarrassing relics of a distant past which have no relevance to the current mission and operations of the foundation? Are they a yellow, deteriorating, and inferior work of art that fails to measure up to the quality of many of the paintings in the club's collection? I, of course, would answer both of these rhetorical questions with an unequivocal no. Not only are they an example of the, quote, the great interest in mural painting during the Great Depression, close quote, but they are also one of the very few extant mural cycles from this period in the Chicago area and the only one in the club's collection. They were executed by a Chicago artist of some renown whose work deserves to be better known, and they fit perfectly into the club's collection of Midwestern regional art. And even today, when a visitor walks into the Boys Club room for the first time, having no knowledge of the story they tell, the murals make an immediate and dramatic visual impression of a time now past, but still relevant to the present and the future mission of the foundation. There is much to celebrate about the murals. They serve, as Mary Ann Richter said, as important documentation of the programs offered by the Union League Boys and Girls Clubs during its early years. They were crucial years in the life of the organization. What was accomplished by the members of the Union League Club in creating the foundation and establishing and financing its operations during that 15-year period, including keeping them functioning at a high level during the depths of the Depression, is truly heroic. I am unaware of any community outreach effort that better exemplifies what sets the Union League Club of Chicago apart from all of the other social clubs, current and past, in the city. While the mission of the foundation has evolved over the years to keep pace with changes in the needs of the populations it serves, it remains the same in its essentials. I would argue that the murals are timeless, that they continue to personify the mission and goals of the foundation, and that they eminently deserve the care and respect over the long term of both the club and the foundation. Thank you.